Valve just announced a brand new version of the Steam Deck, the Steam Deck OLED. Specifically, this version of the Steam Deck has, as the name implies, a much better screen, as well as a few other surprising changes. So we'll go over all that today, and we'll go through whether it makes sense to upgrade if you already have a Steam Deck, or if you're buying one for the first time, which version it makes sense to buy. So let's get into this. So first of all, in terms of performance, right? The CPU and the GPU are exactly the same between the Steam Deck LCD, as they're now calling the original, and the Steam Deck OLED. So in terms of raw performance, you're looking at roughly the same sort of benchmarks between the two, right? The main difference, however, is that on the original, the process node was 7 nanometers, and that's been shrunk down to 6 in the OLED. So again, in terms of raw performance, you're looking roughly like for like, but the efficiency is going to be higher on the OLED. So the OLED is going to be slightly more efficient, it's going to be slightly easier to cool, and so the overall thermal performance is going to be very slightly better on the OLED. In terms of RAM, they both share the same amount and type of RAM. They both have 16 gigs of LPDDR5, but the OLED has very slightly higher clocked RAM. So on the Steam Deck LCD, they come in clocked at 5500 megatransfers per second, whereas on the Steam Deck OLED, they come in clocked at 6400 megatransfers per second. So that's a very slight bump in RAM performance. In terms of how much that's going to equate to like a real life difference, we're talking maybe 1 to 2 frames per second extra, so like maybe an extra 2-3%. So again, in terms of raw performance, you're looking mostly like for like. So now we get into the real meat of the changes, the screen itself. So obviously, they've changed the chemistry of the screen from an LCD to an OLED, but that's not the only changes. There's actually quite a few changes to the screen and the overall display as well. So first of all, the display is an OLED, obviously, but it's also slightly bigger. So the original Steam Deck, the Steam Deck LCD, had a 7-inch diagonal screen. The OLED has a 7.4-inch screen diagonally, so it's 0.4 of an inch bigger. But despite the larger screen, the body of the Steam Deck, and in fact even the area of the screen, is exactly the same. The actual real estate taken up by the screen is the same between the LCD and the OLED. The difference is that the bezels are smaller on the OLED, so that means the actual screen itself takes up a larger proportion of this area right here. So that means you're getting a slightly larger screen, but not at the expense of a larger device, which is great, honestly. It's amazing. They've also bumped it up from a 60 Hz display to a 90 Hz, so you're getting a significantly higher refresh rate right there. They've also increased the brightness of the screen because this is a HDR display as opposed to the SDR display on the LCD. So the maximum brightness of the OLED, it goes up to 1000 nits for HDR content, and for SDR content it goes up to 600 nits. For the LCD, the maximum brightness was around 400 nits. So it's pretty significantly brighter as well. And then the final update they've made specifically for the screen is they've increased the polling rate of the touchscreen. So that means it's going to be significantly more responsive when you touch the screen. So now it's a 180 Hz polling rate on the touchscreen, which means that it's going to track the movement of your finger much more easily on the OLED as opposed to the LCD, which should result in a much more fluid and responsive touchscreen experience. So the OLED features Wi-Fi 6E as well as Bluetooth 5.3. And now for the second biggest change in the OLED. They've increased the size of the battery while also keeping the same overall dimensions of the Steam Deck. The way they've managed to do this is because the OLED screen is significantly thinner than the LCD panel. So what that meant is they had some extra space that they could use to slightly increase the size of the battery. So they've actually increased it from a 40 watt hour battery to a 50 watt hour battery, which is a 25% increase. That's a big jump, right? So that by itself should give you at least a 25% longer battery life on the OLED as opposed to the LCD, which is a massive change because that was one of the chief complaints with the Steam Deck. The fact that you couldn't really go and travel around with it and play intensive games because you would very quickly be looking for power. And also they've changed the battery chemistry slightly to allow for faster charging. So now Valve say you can get from 20% to 80% charge in only 45 minutes, right? Which is pretty impressive. And once you sort of like wrap all of this together, right, you have a 25% larger battery. You have an OLED display, which means that you can turn individual pixels on or off. And blacks are actually true black because the pixel is off, right? Which should result in a significantly more efficient device, right? So the larger battery, the OLED display, you have the ability to fast charge it. So all of that put together means you have a device in the OLED that can go significantly longer on charge than the LCD. Valve in their tech specs say it can last for up to 50% longer than the LCD, which is a massive jump, right? And also actually the OLED weighs less than the LCD. So it weighs about 29 grams less, which again is like 5%. So it's not a huge jump, but you know, it's lighter, it has a bigger screen, it can last significantly longer on a single charge, it can fast charge, and it has a much better display. Valve in this iteration have literally fixed pretty much every major problem that people had with the Steam Deck. You know, besides the power, but that's a separate thing, right? Valve have said they are working on a Steam Deck 2. It's just a matter of finding the right chip to use in it. And the thing is, these aren't the only changes they've made. If you are into the sort of like repairability side of things, they've actually improved quite a lot of things there as well. So first of all, on the back of the Steam Deck, so all of these screws that you see here on the LCD are Phillips heads, which is not the best because they're fairly easy to strip. Whereas on the OLED, they've upgraded them all to Torx screws. And you know, if you know anything about screws, and Torx are very good because you know they have a very tight grip and they're quite easy to, I guess, to play with. So all the screws have been upgraded from Phillips to Torx. They've also reduced the amount of different types of screws in the chassis, as well as increasing underneath here the size of the fan to cool the APU. So as we said before, because of the shrink in the process size, it's a more efficient APU. But they've also increased the size of the fan to increase the thermal performance of the APU even more, right? So that's all of these are great, honestly great. They've also made it such that if you want to swap out the screen on the OLED, you don't need to open up the back of the Steam Deck. Whereas on the LCD, if you want to swap out the screen, you do have to take pretty much all of it apart, and only then can you take the screen out. And finally, you know, they've introduced a brand new storage option, the 1TB. So the Steam Deck LCD has three models: 64 gig, 256 gig, and 512 gig, right? The OLED only has two models really, the 512 gig and the 1TB. The 256 gig model that they're offering on their site is really the LCD. So the only thing you get extra with the 1TB model is obviously a larger capacity drive. You get a two-part case, so you get the sort of like standard Steam Deck case, but then within that it's like a thinner sort of like liner that you can use as a separate case by itself. So that's quite cool. You get a couple of exclusive, I think, online things on the Steam store, and you also get a anti-glare screen, which means that you won't really experience the true like deep blacks of an OLED because there's going to be an extra layer on top, which sort of, you know, I get it. I mean, I was tempted to get it myself, but you know, the whole point of the screen is you want to experience the screen, right? You know, it's because it's a brand new, beautiful display, and you can't really do that with the anti-glare coating. So I don't know. I wouldn't personally recommend the 1TB. To me, the 512 gig seems like the perfect choice. So it's around £479. I'm not sure what that is in dollars. I'll put that up somewhere here. But for that price, you're getting quite a few upgrades over the LCD Steam Deck. So the real question is, if you already have a Steam Deck LCD, is the OLED worth the upgrade? And that's a very difficult question to answer because it depends on how you play your Steam Deck. If you use it mostly docked, then don't bother. There's literally no real upgrade that you're gonna see, right? Whereas if you play mostly on the go, right, and you want a much better screen, much better battery life, and a couple of other small improvements here and there, then there's a case to be made for buying the OLED. Again, it depends on you. It depends on how much you're willing to spend on a brand new model and what you're going to do with the old one. If you can gift it to somebody like a friend or a relative or something, or you can sell it on for a decent amount of money, then buying the OLED might be a good idea. But that's entirely up to you. Whereas if you're buying a Steam Deck for the first time, then I think, honestly, with the amount of improvements that the OLED offers over the LCD, I do think the 512 gig OLED is the one to buy. And yeah, going forward, I think genuinely the OLED seems like a much better buy as opposed to the LCD. So if I were you, I would steer away from the 256 gig LCD and just buy the 512 gig OLED. That being said, if you want to buy the 64 gig LCD Steam Deck, that's a very good buy as well because they've reduced the price even more. And if you don't want to bite at the price of the OLED, the 64 gig LCD is a very good buy as well. That being said, I'm very likely to buy one myself, and I'll do like a proper comparison myself between the Legion Go, the Steam Deck LCD, the Steam Deck OLED. So stay tuned for that. If you want to see my unboxing of the Legion Go, click up here, and I will catch you next time.